What's going on, everyone? We have the meta snapshot for patch 13.24b. I did the patch review a little bit earlier in case you missed the surprise patch, so you can check out all the changes there, but what's most important is the changes to the meta, which we're going to go over right now. So we're going to go through all the comps that are good and how to play them, what items to build, where to place the units, augments, everything, etc. So if you want to climb in the next month, because this patch is going to last for like 5 weeks or something like that, we gotta study up, because they're not gonna do any more patches unless there's actually like a literal game-breaking bug, because everyone's on holiday. So right now there's a bit of a surprise. In the S tier, Country is still good, and then Jax Reroll has taken the world by storm. So I wanna show you something that's very interesting. So I've been data checking Jax Reroll, and it is a 4.62 right now, and if you 3-star him, it's a 4.06. So earlier today, I actually had the same stats up because a lot of people were telling me about the comp and I didn't really believe the hype because it was averaging a 5.03 9 hours ago with a lot fewer games. The 3-star rate was also only a 4.57. Since then, it's risen about like 0.5 placements for both like average place and the 3-star average placement. And the 3-star rate has shot up a lot because everyone's going for this comp now. It's really good. That's how good it is. It's going to be even better because it's just getting started. But of course, there's still a lot of other things to play, so that is the good news so far. Crowd Diver's still good. In the A tier, we have Ezreal Caitlyn. This is a new comp that we've added. Annie, the best one-cost reroll in the game right now. KDA Ahri Akali, Executioner Akali Karthus, Katarina Reroll, Emo Reroll, Fast 9, Misfortune Reroll, Twisted Fate, Disco Dazzler. Pentakill, Rapidfire, Caitlyn, Bruisers. That's going to round out the A and S tier. These are going to be our bread and butter. Keep in mind, whenever you're playing TFT, there are only 8 players in the game. So that means at most there are going to be 8 different team compositions that you're going to face. But you may notice in the S and A tier, we have a ton, and people in the S tier, like multiple people are going to be going for these in a lot of cases. So you really only see around like maybe 6 to 8 comps every single game. But we have a lot more listed here because there are obviously different spots you could kind of go each and every comp. So I'll try to clear that up for you as we go on into the how to play section. But just to round out the B tier, I only play this if I have absolutely perfect starts for them. S and A tier I kind of flex into. But Punk, Corki Reroll, Ezreal Bruiser, Seraphine Reroll, Yasuo Reroll, Heartsteel, and Olaf are going to round out the B and C tier. C tier, don't play. Olaf is garbage. You could see that even if you 3-star him, 4.85, like there are better things to do with life. But let's start out with the first comp we have here. We have Country Reroll. Good old Country. Urgot Samira 3-star, like you can never go wrong with that. The best part about this is that notice how we don't have a headliner highlighted. Sometimes when I go to teamfight.lol and I'm making a team comp there, you could hover over a unit, select the headliner, and select like whichever trait you want. But you don't even need Country Headliner to play this comp because you could like always play Tahm Kench. And 7, no one really ever gets to 7, so you're more than happy with just 5. But let's say you do get Country Headliner, you just drop Tahm Kench, and then you just add in a second unit. In this case, it could be like a Mosher or a Crowd Diver. But that's why this comp has kind of stayed towards the top the entirety of set 10 so far. 5 Country is super, super powerful. It's great for collecting top 4s. Beyond that, not that great. You're not gonna like win a ton of games with Country Reroll, but you don't have to win games to climb. You could go like 3rd, 4th or something, and like you'll be climbing pretty quickly. But the way to play this comp is to level to 5 at 2-5, level to 6 at 3-2, level to 7 at 4-1, and then you could slow roll at level 7 for 3-star Samira and Urgot. I do this if I have a ton of Urgots and Samiras, or if I'm contested and I have a chance to 3-star everyone before the other guy gets a chance to. But if not, you just go level 8 and slow roll at level 8, waiting for the other guy to die, or just adding in extra units or pivoting out of the comp completely. One thing that I like to do with this comp with the augments is I like having a lot of items. They either are 2-unit comps or like 3-unit comps. The 2-unit comps, those generally don't need any item augments, but this comp is like, you could itemize Thresh, you could itemize Urgot, Samira, even Katarina or Vex in some cases. So a lot of times you like the item augments such as like binary airdrop, literally anything that gives components or full items, because you are going to be making use of a lot of them. That would be what I would say is like the only big picture thing that you kind of need to look out for whenever you're playing this, because apart from that, it's just a simple 3-cost reroll comp, and you just roll until you get 3-star Urgot and Samira and pray that they carry. Do note, in the how to play section, you can find this on the website bunnymuffins.lol/meta, where I update this every single Friday. This is a heavily contested comp, so sometimes you fast level at 3-5 and roll down, and find your headliners before all the units get taken out of the pool. So do scout sometime in like late stage 2, early stage 3 before you commit to the comp, or like when you're planning what to do later on. Some people have the question of whether to play Vex or Karthus in the comp. I'd say if you have no items, Vex is a little better because she stuns people, but if you do have like a ton of good damage items, then I do prefer Karthus. But sometimes you get Vex 3-star for free, so sometimes you just go for it and just use that. For items, we have for Samira, like you want some sort of armor reduction in the comp because Urgot and Samira both only do physical damage. And then just generic attack damage items will do. Urgot, like the Bruiserish AD items will work. And then any AP items for Vex and Karthus. Core, of course, is just 5 country and then random stuff. We don't have a Mosher in this picture right now, but you could literally play any Mosher, does not matter. After that, for augments, we do have some listed out in the picture here. You could pretty much use anything. They all work pretty well. Maybe you want like one econ augment, like maybe golden ticket or something like that, in order to help you hit all the 3 stars. But apart from that, any combat augment will do just fine. Next up we have is the comp of the week, Jax Reroll. This one's going to be EDM Mosher. Mosher got a big buff. EDM, I believe, got some buffs as well. So this comp just got a lot better because of that. Zed was already pretty good beforehand, and I think Zac got a buff too, and Poppy. So a lot of things got buffed. And the great thing about this build is that you can pivot into the Yone build almost any time that you want. So Yone and Jax and Zed, believe it or not, use a lot of similar items. All the frontline bruiser items such as Quicksilver, Edge of Night, Serix Gauge, anything that gives like survivability to your frontline, it works good on both like this build and this build. So you could just build those items, and if you get a lot of Jaxes, build some AP items, go for Jax. If not, go for Yone if you get a lot of Yones. For your headliner, you really want EDM Jax, but honestly, any Jax works because you're not just going to pass on 3 Jaxes for fun, but you do have like very, very high chances of getting him. Obviously, if you don't, you might want to consider going for a different comp because it's like much better than not having it for obvious reasons. For this build, you want to follow a 2-cost reroll pattern because you really just want Jax 3, and that's just the most effective way to get him. There is one exception. You could roll a little bit at level 7. You don't have to do all your rolling at level 6. If we take a look at the leveling guide, which is on the website, and then scroll all the way down to the champion odds and pool size, you can see that at level 6, we have a 40% chance of getting 2-cost units. And then at level 7, we have a 35% chance. So it's not like that big of a difference, but you do get added bonuses for all the other costs. So sometimes you could level up to 7, though I prefer staying at level 6 until I finish everything in most cases. So even though like 90% of the time you're going to be using the regular 2-cost reroll pattern, I do want to mention the exceptions. And then over time, you'll learn when to do the exception and when not to. But essentially, most of the time you want to go level 6 at stage 3-2. Stabilize a bit, find headliner Jax ideally, econ back up, slow roll to 50 gold every single turn, and then find a time to all in. For the EDM active, you want to choose Jax. It's just going to do a ton of damage, and there are also other versions of this build. For example, you could add in like 6 Mosher. Right now we just have 4, but pretty much throw in as many EDMs and Moshers as you can, and obviously the headliner does not matter. For items, Jax really likes Jeweled Gauntlet and Handed Justice, and then one defensive item. Quicksilver, I think, is the best, but any of the frontline bruiser items are going to do just fine, and some healing. Also, Zed, Edge of Night, BT, and then any damage item for third, going to be doing really well. And then Lux, any AP items, Zac, any tank items. Some late game things to play in this build is adding something like a Yorick for more Moshers later on, and obviously if you have Mosher chosen, then you get 6 already. If we look at all the Moshers, you have like a ton of options. You could add in something like Urgot later on to get to 6. This is going to be if you are at level 9. Pretty simple comp though, but I do recommend trying to play it as much as possible because it's getting pretty popular right now. Next build up we have is Crowd Diver, Zed, and Yone. Again, Yone can use a lot of the same items. For example, like from the Jax we have here, Hand of Justice is used, Quicksilver can be used, Titans can be used, Bloodthirster can be used. Pretty much any of the non-ability power items Yone can use. So they both support kind of the same playstyle if you like slamming those items early on. You want to follow like some sort of standard leveling pattern, and then if you are going for Zed, roll at level 8. If you're going for Yone 3, you have to decide whether you want to do it at level 7 or level 8. Level 7 and level 8 have very similar odds for 3-cost units, so it doesn't really matter too much which one you level at. It really just depends how quickly you need it. If you have like a ton of copy of Yone's early, then just roll at 7, hit it, and then level up later. But if you're like super healthy, don't have too many copies of Yone, then level up to level 8 instead. That way you get Zed 2-star a little bit faster. The rest of the build is just like random crowd divers. You could add in stuff like Kiana for the late game. She is going to be the only legendary that you're kind of playing, at least from the core. We have around 9 units here, so this is kind of like a level 9 setup. But one thing to keep in mind for crowd divers is don't frontline them, even though they have defensive items and they could drop aggro with stuff like Edge and Knight. You want them to live as long as possible because that's how the crowd diver trait works. The longer your units live, the more damage that they do, so you don't want to just like have them in the front, and sometimes they get blown up, unfortunately, because of some random fight RNG. For headliners, it could be Yone, Zed, or Kiana. Ideally, you want crowd diver to get to 6 crowd diver, but any of them will work. Obviously, you're aiming more for Yone earlier on, and if you're 3-starring him, you could keep it. If not, if he's only going to be 2-star, then you want to focus on these 2 instead. I'd say the only 2 requirements is like Edge and Knight. It's just the best item on 2 melee carries that like need to live for a really long time, and then also Armor Shred is very useful because they just do all physical damage in this comp. There is one other crowd diver build which we will dive into later, but that pretty much rounds out the S tier comps right now. Moving on into the A tier, these are going to be like your go-tos that you could kind of flex into. The first one's going to be Ezreal Caitlyn. So if you're doing like a fast 8 and you don't really know what to do, and you have like generally good backline items, then Ezreal Caitlyn is something to consider because you just throw random frontline in front, Ezreal Caitlyn duo carry in the back, and then you pray. If you can reach 9, obviously you go for it, and then you get a ton stronger than a lot of other people. But it's kind of just like a generic, we have random frontline units, we have random backline units type of comp. Obviously you do prefer the AD items because they both use them, but pretty much you just want to go for a 4-cost comp. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 4-cost units. So what leveling pattern are we going to use? Pop quiz. It's going to be a fast 8. So fast 8ing is just getting to level 8 as fast as possible. One possible opener is something like a Corki headliner, and then upgrading the big shot or rapid fires as you move on and on. One great thing about this comp is that there are tons of like random units that you could switch your headliner into in the mid game. For example, if we scroll down a bit, you could use something like a Phelios, you could use something like Senna, and then later on, you don't even have to use a big shot or a rapid fire. You could even use something random like an Urgot or maybe a Samira. Obviously, Misfortune's going to be a bit easier to play into, but you have a ton of different options available. Your late game is going to be capped out with either Lucian or Jhin. Those 2 units are going to be able to hold a lot of your items. You could even replace the 4 costs for them and swap the items over if you get the legendaries to 2-star, but that doesn't really happen in a ton of games. This comp is kind of difficult to play because you kind of need to be able to flex different units, and sometimes you just have to know when to put suboptimal items on Ezreal and Caitlyn. For example, if you build like only Ezreal items, and then you're like, oh, I only have a 1-star Ezreal, I have a 2-star Caitlyn. Sometimes you have to drop the Ezreal items on your Caitlyn if you don't have too many Caitlyn items, because you always have to try to play for your 2-stars, and knowing which exact situations to do one or the other kind of just comes with experience because it also depends on like what your health is at. For tank items, you have a lot of different item holders: Thresh, Blitz, Poppy, and Zac. We have 2 of them here. We have Thresh and Blitzcrank. You pretty much just mix and match whoever, because things like Ezreal, like he doesn't really need too much to get going. You just need 2 big shot, and then he can even have that on his own if you get him with a headliner. So sometimes you don't even need to run something like a Misfortune, and then the rest of your board kind of is just really flexible. But pretty much you could play almost anything with the build, just run the carries and a bunch of random tanks. Next up, we have a much easier comp to play. We went from like the hardest comp to like the easiest comp. Annie Reroll is just click all the Annies in your shop, play Superfans, play the same exact board as you see on the left, and you just win games and only put 2 items on Annie. So that's all you have to do. Click Annie and put 2 items on her. After that, you're good to go. I'll probably go over this comp a lot more later on in my Unranked to Diamond series, because we definitely will be playing some sort of reroll comp. A lot of people, they kind of know how to slow roll, but they don't actually know how to do it in practice. So hopefully through that gameplay, we'll be able to get into more detail there. But all in all, you just need like 3 Spellweaver, 2 Emo. You prefer Annie Emo. That way you don't even have to run a Mumu. And then your traits just like end up being perfect. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 units without the Mumu. And then after that, you level up to like level 7, level 8, you just throw in random stuff. But you pretty much reach the power of the comp at level 6, which is absolutely incredible, assuming you have Annie 3 already. At level 8, some people might wonder, do I want 4 Emo or 5 Spellweaver? I do prefer the 5 Spellweaver right now, but obviously you just play what you get. If you have a bunch of 2-star Emos and 1-star Spellweavers obviously play the emos instead. For items, it's just Spear, Shojin, and Nashers. It's pretty much almost non-negotiable. The third item is going to be the Superfan item. But yeah, you pretty much don't want to play around with the items that much. Next build up we have is KDA Ahri Akali, classic 4-cost comp, deep into a trade, 5 KDAs. What I like about this comp is that you can play the early game really easily. A lot of times when you play around a 1-cost carry, such as like an Evelynn, for example, like sometimes I like playing Headliner Evelynn when I do the KDA Ahri comp. And then sometimes you need to find a replacement Evelynn. The good news about this comp is that the final comp doesn't really play Evelynn, so you could just sell the Evelynn and not feel bad about it at all. That's probably my favorite part about this comp, even though it's kind of like a minor detail. Since we are running a lot of 4-costs, Akali and Ahri, sometimes Karthus, you want to do a fast 8 to get your 4-costs as fast as possible. So either around like 4-2 or 4-5, depending on what your health is at, how much gold you have. I'd want to roll around like 40 gold, so sometimes you could reach that on stage 4-2, but if you can't, you only have like 20 gold after you level up to level 8, you much rather wait until 4-5 before you roll down. The great part about this comp is that a lot of people are too lazy to position around Akali, so their carries are left in the corner. I'm pretty sure this build does better at like lower ratings and then gets worse at it as it gets higher because people kind of start to position around it. We can actually investigate that a little bit right now. So right now she's averaging like a 4.42 in Master Plus. If we go to Gold, for example, 4.08. So I guess in that quick check, yeah, and then as you get higher into Emerald, Akali gets a bit worse. So the lower you are, Akali is going to be better, and it's mainly just because no one's going to be positioning around her. It's actually really funny how this data works. Literally like the whole way up as you get better and better, she literally gets worse. It's actually hilarious. For items, any AD/Bruiser/healing item is going to work on Akali, tank items on Echo or Nico. It doesn't have to be Echo. It can be Nico or Echo. And then Ahri with the blue buff. For positioning, just throw them on the KDA hex. Don't copy the positioning you see here because it's going to change every single game you play. I think there are around like 5 different KDA setups. I forget however many there are, but all the shiny squares you see on your screen, that's going to be what you want to put your units on. You can check out the gameplay video over here. I have this for like some of the comps out there. Definitely will help you out if you want like a specific game around one of those comps. And I have these for like a lot of different ones. So again, go to the website bunnymuffins.lol/meta. Oh, one fun fact. If you go there on like Thursday night, sometimes it's up earlier, so you could get a head start on all the video watchers if you are like a constant website user, because the video does come out later than the website post. Executioner Akali Karthus is going to be the next build. Very similar to the other comp that we just saw. Instead of KDAs, you just run like Karthus carry, and Karthus is decent. I wouldn't say he's like the best thing ever, but if you get him for free, you get him for free, and then Akali's still going to do pretty good work. It's mainly an Akali build, and if you do get like 4 Executioner through like one of the headliners, either Akali or Karthus, it's going to work out even better. So you see this down here. Headliners are Akali, Executioner, or KDA, and then Karthus, also any headliner would work, but you do prefer Executioner on both of them just to get to 4 much easier. We only have 7 units in this comp right now, so you could just like level up to 8, play like a Twitch or Samira, and call it a day from there. But sometimes you want that extra slot for like random legendary units that you can kind of flex in. Pretty simple comp though, just fast 8 for that. Plays very similar to the KDA build, but you have like a different option for an out. Katarina Reroll is going to be the next build. This is the other crowd diver comp we were talking about, but this one's just like all about Katarina. Double Hodge, Jeweled Gauntlet, going to be the best build, but any AP or survivability items would do fine, but I do really prefer these 3 specific items because she's pretty much the only unit that matters. Obviously, the other units still do some things, like later on in the game, you will need to rely on like Zed to kind of help you out, Kiana for like the super late game in the games where you win. But if you get like thirds and fourths, you kind of only need Katarina items, and just guaranteeing that is already one big step for mankind. But of course, if you want to like win the game, Kiana is necessary, Zed with good items is necessary. But all you have to do is follow the 2-cost reroll pattern, which is the same as the Jax comp. So this comp actually gets a little bit better because of the way unit pools work. If we look at like all the 2-cost champions, let me change this back to Master Plus. Right now, all the units that get rerolled is like Bard a little bit, Katarina, Semi, Senna a tiny bit, and then after that, it's really just Jax. We could actually look at the 3-star rates over here. So we could see Pantheon and Twitch are by far the most, but that's because they're punk. Do they really count? 3-star rate essentially means like when they are played, so you see their play rate over here, how often are they 3-starred? But we see Jax being played a bunch, Senna a ton too, because people really like the true damage build, it's pretty solid. But then we have Katarina. Again, we're going to expect that this Jax number goes up a lot and a lot because the comp is just reaching like its peak right now, or like it's going to reach its peak in a bit. So as soon as people do that, Katarina is going to be a lot easier to play. And the reason is that you can just get her a lot easier so she doesn't cost too much gold. Next up we have is Emo Reroll. Emo Reroll is a 3-cost reroll comp. This is like the first one that we've seen other than the country build. This build is okay. There are better options to kind of go for. Like, would I rather have 3-star Urgot, 3-star Samira? Of course, but sometimes we get a ton of Amumus and a ton of Vexes, and we're like, okay, I guess we have to play it this time. And this is kind of what the build would look like. It's just an emo build for emo, pretty decent. Emos did get changed a little bit, so that does help them out a tad. And then super late game, you can rely on stuff like Karthus, Poppy to kind of push you into the top. For the super duper late game, you could add something like a Yorick, because Yorick is a Guardian, so you could replace like Pantheon for Yorick and have even more frontline and a legendary to kind of play around. And then since you're running Yorick, you could add something like a Pentakill for Karthus if Karthus actually is doing a bunch of work. But sometimes you don't have enough items to kind of like play with everyone like that. So really put your main focus on Amumu, then Vex, then after that either Poppy or Karthus. 3-cost reroll is a bit tricky to play though. A lot of times you need good econ augments. Sometimes you need like even 2 econ augments, but I generally want at least one of them. Some comps you want like 3 combat augments. What I mean by like econ versus combat augment, when we're looking at like random augments, I'm just gonna pick like, let's say like healing orbs. Healing orbs heals the nearest ally when an enemy dies. So obviously that's like a combat augment because during the fight it helps your team. Something that's not a combat augment would be something like Tiny Titans. You just increase your current and max player health. So you could use that to like get more resources in the game because you could lose a couple more rounds and be fine. So that would be considered like a soft econ augment. Something that's like a little more obvious as like a pure econ augment would be something like Balanced Budget. This one literally just gives you like a ton of gold. But generally, whenever you're playing 3-cost reroll, since they're like very expensive units, and if you hit them, you do outshine all the 2-star 4-costs. If the game is balanced, that generally means you need a little bit help kind of hitting them. Next build up we have is the Fast 9 build. Like, it got nerfed a ton. Like, I'm not saying you can't do it, but it's more of like a Fast 9 and 4-cost, then 5-cost later. Because there's only like a 2% chance to get a 5-cost headliner now whenever you're level 9. So yes, you could go Fast 9. Yes, you could find a lot of 5-cost still, but they won't be headliners. Then later on, you could switch your 4-cost headliner into a 5-cost, and then you are back to the old build. But it definitely takes a lot longer. But if you get like tons of econ augments, definitely still can go for this. It's still very good. Or you could just flex into it. Like, I wouldn't ever like force Fast 9 anymore like I did before, but flexing into it, perfectly okay to kind of do. So if you are just win streaking with like this random board and you're not committed to anything, and maybe you have a Rage Blade for Sono later on, what you can do is still do the Fast 9 playstyle. Just realize that you won't be able to get a 5-cost headliner that reliably. So just pick a 4-cost. It could be literally anyone, like doesn't have to be Thresh, which is the only one in the picture here. It could be anyone that holds your items. And then later on, once you natural the 5-cost or reach level 10, that's going to be the sign where you're like, okay, let me go into the regular build that we all played for the past couple of weeks. I won't go into this too much because like it is a little bit of a complicated build, but there are a lot of other comps to play right now. Next build up we have is Misfortune Reroll. Still very good with That's Jazz. I really wouldn't play it in other situations. But if you do get the That's Jazz augment, or if you get like a ton of Misfortunes, ton of Bards earlier on, that's the only time I would kind of consider playing this build. Reason why is just because it's gotten nerfed a lot, and there are just better things to kind of go for. But if you do get That's Jazz, definitely worth going for. And one thing to keep in mind is it is a 3-cost reroll build, and again, super expensive, so it's kind of hard to reach your cap without dying. So just keep that in mind whenever you're playing those comps. Next up, we have Twisted Fate Disco Dazzler, classic 4-cost build with the 4-cost tank, 4-cost damage dealer, and then just a bunch of trait bots in between. If you have a lot of attack speed items, that's generally when I like going for this. Twisted Fate pretty much just loves anything that deals with attack speed, like Static Shiv, Rage Blade, and then AP items like Archangels, Jeweled Gauntlet, Rabadon's Death Cab, a couple other ones that I'm missing here. And then for 4-cost, just throw generic tank items on your Blitzcrank. This is never like my first choice of a comp to go for, but if I'm rolling down, I'm doing a fast 8 and I'm like semi-flexing and I see like a Disco Blitzcrank or like a Dazzler Twisted Fate or something like that, I might just pick it if I have any semi-decent items to go for them. Sometimes in the early game you just slammed a Rage Blade because it was your only buildable item, and this is one of those options to kind of go for. It's going to be this one and like the Ezreal build, the Ezreal Caitlyn build, because I know Rageblade isn't listed here, but you could put it on like Ezreal. It's definitely usable in a lot of other units. Also, like Sona can use it too in the Fast 9 build. Just because an item isn't listed as like the very best item on someone doesn't mean you can't build it on them. There are a ton of items in the game. I try to like list out as many as I can in the item section. Like for example, over here for Misfortune, we have Rageblade, we have Last Whisper, Giant Slayer, Deathblade, Guardbreaker, Infinity Edge. There are even more items in this that you could possibly build, but these are just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that you could build, even though we only show 2 in the picture because she also gets her headliner item. Going back into Twisted Fate though, again, not my first choice in terms of a comp, but if I'm flexing, definitely an option, even if it's not the best. Next up, we have Pentakill. Kind of same logic here. Viego was good for a bit last patch, but since then, kind of move him aside for the Jax build because they kind of use the same items. Yone is also a bit better. So if I were to build these items, I'd go for the other comps, not so much the Viego comp, even though Viego is still pretty solid. Data isn't everything, but he is like a 4.44 right now. It's like pretty average, but you really only go for it in like good scenarios. Apart from that, he's like pretty much like a trait bot. Some people are playing him as an edgelord when they go for Yone builds, or just using him when they're going for like Karthus. But as a main carry, he's still pretty solid, and it's really easy to do in the Pentakill comp because you get both like Viego and Kayle are Pentakills and edgelords, so you just need to add one more to complete the synergy. Do Fast 8 for this comp because you're going for Zed, Viego, and Karthus, all 4 costs. So you want to do, again, like 40 gold at around like 4.2 or like 60 gold or 50 gold at 4.5. Next build up we have is Rapidfire Caitlyn Bruisers. This is kind of like a different version of the Ezreal Caitlyn build that we saw before. Maybe it doesn't need its own section. Maybe we should combine them later, but this is just like another layout that you could kind of use with Jazz. Because a lot of times you don't get both Caitlyn and Ezreal, so if you only get Caitlyn, this is what something could possibly look like. After that, we have the B tier, Punk Reroll. Ah, man, Punk Reroll. What to do with this build? Only go for this if you get like a ton and a ton and a ton of punks. Like, if not, it's pretty hopeless. Obviously, do 1-cost reroll pattern, but this build is rough. Like, if you don't hit your punks early, and for some reason, I never get both Vi and Jinx. I only get one or the other. I don't know why, but that's just how my games have personally played out. But if you don't hit your carry early, which is preferably Jinx, right, and then Pantheon 3-star, this comp falls off so hard. So you must win like every round in stage 3 and stage 4 because starting stage 5, you will lose a lot. So you try to slowly bleed out into a top 4 in a lot of cases after win streaking for most of the game. The sad part about this build is that in the super late game, there isn't any like game breaking unit you could kind of fit in to kind of like push your team over the top to win a lot of matches. I'm not saying it's impossible to win with Punk. Like obviously people have won with it. I've won with it before too, but it takes a lot and a lot and a lot in order to do so. But if you have like a ton of Punk units or a ton of Jinxes in the early game and non-headliner Jinx, so if you have like 3 regular Jinxes and then you haven't seen the headliner yet, that's a good sign to go for this build because once you do get the headliner Jinx, you have 6 copies of her and then it's much easier to hit the 3-star. I think a trap that a lot of people fall into is that they just force the comp of their first headliner. So if you see a Jinx headliner with no other copies of Jinx and you buy it right away, you still need to find like 6 Jinxes to complete the comp, and a lot of people get baited into that, I feel. So I think Punk is kind of like a noob trick type of build. The play rate is definitely like a lot higher than it should be, I think. But after that, we have Corki Reroll. This is a solid 1-cost comp, but it did get like hit a little bit. Still decent overall, but like Annie is like really the only super viable 1-cost reroll right now. Like you're not happy that you're going like Punk or going Corki, even though they are possible. Next up we have is Ezreal Bruisers. This is kind of similar to the Ezreal Caitlyn comp that we saw at the very top, just a different version of it. If you don't get Caitlyn, this is what it could look like. It also doesn't have to be Bruisers, it's just one version of it. And of course you want to add in a big shot for Ezreal also, but it depends what type of headliner you get. If you get Heartsteel headliner, obviously you could like drop Aphelios for someone else, and if you do get big shot headliner, then you don't need the big shot at all. Seraphine reroll is a 2-cost reroll, but definitely a lot better options. Only go for this if you have like a ton of Seraphines for some reason and good items for her. Yasuo reroll. Again, I feel like a lot of people get baited into Yasuo. Same with Olaf reroll that we'll go into later. That's a C tier. All the 1-cost rerolls, just like be very careful whenever you go for them because again, you need regular copies of the units. You don't want the headliner. I mean, you do want the headliner, but you don't count it as like part of the how many units you have of them, because if you don't have the headliner, that means you can get it later and you just get like 3 free copies of it, and that makes your team like that much stronger. Senna reroll is very solid. Like we saw in the data, Senna reroll was pretty good, but Senna fits in kind of like a lot of different comps, so it's kind of hard to tell with her. Sometimes she's used as a trait bot, sometimes you're just playing a lot of true damage, and more so playing around Akali. But if you do go for Yasuo reroll, you could pick up Senna as well, and that build does pretty decently. Next build up we have is Heartsteel reroll. This is kind of like a meme build, but if you get like a ton of Heartsteels, it's really fun to do. And like it is a game at the end of the day. Just because something's lower in the tier list doesn't mean you should never go for it. Because I mean, if you're trying to have fun, like yeah, that's where it'll be. Except for Olaf Reroll. Do not play Olaf Reroll. Like, okay, maybe 1 out of like 50 games play Olaf Reroll, but most games like try not to do it because it's just not very good. Bruisers did get buffed, so it's not as bad as it was before. Maybe it deserves to be in the B tier. I don't know. Let's summarize at the top because like we went through a lot of like bogus comps that we don't really need to care too much about. Focus on like the Jax, focus on country, focus on crowd divers. Like the S tier should be like what you're going in like 40% of the games. So if you play like 20 games over a patch, 8 of them probably going to be the S tiers, maybe even more than that, honestly. And then after that, you want to use a lot of the A tier to kind of flex. A lot of people are asking me like, if I had to only play one comp, what should it be? For this patch, maybe you would go for something like, maybe force KDAs every game. I like forcing 4-cost comps a lot because even if they're contested, you still have a pretty reasonable chance to hit everything. Whereas the 3-cost reroll, it's pretty much impossible to play when contested. Annie reroll, you're still able to hit 3-star Annie if someone else is going for it, but I'd just rather not. Also, I guess you could kind of flex between Ezreal and Caitlyn with random frontline, but that's like kind of playing flexibly. It's not really actually just like forcing one build. So if you were to force something, maybe do either Pentakill or KDA, because they're kind of both 4-cost comps and like both are semi-easy to play. The only trouble with doing that is that both of those comps are not in the S tier, but the thing about the S tier comps is that 2 of them are reroll, like Country and Jax. I'm not saying you can't force them, but if you don't get the headliner, like it's pretty hard to play the comp. I don't want to put people in situations where they're like, hey, can't get the headliner, unlucky. And then Crowd Divers takes a little bit more brain than the other comps because you have to decide between like going for the Yone 3 or not, which some people might have trouble with. But that's going to be like my tips for this week, I would say, and like all the comps to go over. Like if you had to force one comp, do like either Akali or Pentakill. And then if you are playing like full serious, like play mainly S tiers and then flex between the A tiers if you can't go for them. Obviously, you need to scout earlier on to see what other people are going. A lot of people think TFT is solitaire. It is not, and scouting's the one way to kind of counteract that. But that's going to be it for me today. All this info will be available on the website. If you want to check out the data as well, the one that I like to look at too, the link is here in the meta snapshot as well, or you could just go to teamfight.lol. But I know that this is going to be a long patch. I'll try to update this like maybe 1 or 2 other times. It depends how much the meta changes. I'll do it by ear. If the meta changes a lot, I'll update it again. If not, we'll kind of just chill. But that's going to be it for me today. Hopefully you all enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time.